Thank you guys for joining us for another wonderful Talks and Chefs at Google LAX. Today we have Andrea Nguyen, who is a very well-known cookbook author, and her latest cookbook, the Banh Mi Handbook, is absolutely fabulous. I was thumbing through it last night. She is going to show you that there's no secrets, so to speak, and no mystery behind making banh mi, and that you can just about do it with anything. So without further ado, Andrea?
Thanks, Bill. And thank you for Kat for bringing me here, and Bill and his staff put together this amazing spread for you today. So I'm going to talk not too fast, but walk you through some of the things that make banh mi special. You guys can ask questions as I'm going through. I'll talk for about 20 minutes, and then what we'd like for you to do is to make your own sandwich. And that's what you're here for, and that's why none of you have any food in your hands, because you're hungry. And the idea when I was talking to Kat about this presentation is that I know you're all really busy. And when I am in a corporate cafeteria situation, or even when I'm traveling and I'm faced with a buffet or something, breakfast buffet or dinner time, I'm basically looking at the spread of the food out there. And I'm saying, how can I make my food out of something I want to eat out of what's out available in the cafeteria or the buffet spread. So when I was here visiting earlier in the summertime, we walked through the cafeteria and I said, hey, this is so cool. You guys have basically all of the ingredients for Googlers to put together their own banh mi, except for maybe a few little things. And so I said to Kat, well, do you guys have refrigerators where you can stash things? And she's like, yeah. And I said, well, the thing that's sort of missing from the cafeteria is pickles, Vietnamese pickles that go into banh mi, because you basically have many of the other items. So today I'm going to show you how to make the classic pickle that goes into Vietnamese sandwiches, and I brought actually two other kinds of pickles that are more like riffs and modern things. And then I'll walk you through how to put together a sandwich, and then we'll let you loose over there at the sandwich DIY banh mi station. Or I call it a banh mi bar. If we had booze, it would be a true bar, right? But I see some vodka back there. So, so here's the thing. The thing with the pickle is that you can make it totally ahead of time, and you can keep it in the fridge for months if you want to. A lot of times cookbook authors will say, oh, well, you can only keep it for 1 month. Well, we're hedging a little bit because we never quite know how long people will keep things. And sometimes they'll keep things for a really long time in the fridge, and you really don't want that coming back at you. So with this pickle, I was having a conversation earlier with Jessica about the Daikon and carrot pickle. And the thing is, a lot of Vietnamese banh mi shops don't put enough Daikon in there for my taste. You need that little funk, right? And I go for a 2-to-1 ratio of Daikon to carrot, which means I'm going to use about 1 pound of Daikon. And in my recipes, you'll see something I'll say, you want a medium Daikon that is about 1 pound. That's roughly the size of your forearm. So I sort of have an average forearm, okay? So then I go and I kind of measure, I look at this, and this was actually kind of a big one. So I bought this at Mitsuwa last night on Centinela, and even though this is a huge Daikon, I'm just gonna use maybe, I weighed it, and I'll use about 2/3 of it, because it came out to about 1 and 2/3 of a pound. The other thing that if you really get geeky about cooking, get yourself a scale, all right? And here's the key about making this. When you choose your Daikon, choose one that's really smooth and beautiful, like this one. And this is my little prop. You can come up here and touch it later on if you want to, because it's a sign that this radish did not struggle. It did not struggle in the ground. If this thing is all gnarly and rough, then it had a tough life, and it will be tough and bitter inside. I kid you not. And younger ones that are, about this size, or about, so we're talking 2 inches at the widest part or narrower, and that's what you want to go with. The super big ones, sometimes they're fibrous inside, and so you want to avoid those. And sometimes, and I know this is going to sound a little weird, I'm standing there at the grocery store, and I want to see if it's a good Daikon, and I can't really tell, sometimes it's looking a little over the hill. I will nick it with my nail, and I'll taste it. I know this is like being videotaped, but that's something that I'll, that I'll do just because I want to make sure it's a good radish. And so, so then you cut it, you cut it into sort of like matchsticks. And it's actually thicker than a matchstick. I know that these days a lot of people who write cookbooks, sometimes they use terms that you may not be familiar with, like julienne or matchsticks. Well, you know what? We don't get matchsticks anymore that often because we're not from restaurants and stuff, so we don't really know the size of a matchstick. So you'll see in my recipe instructions, I'll say the size of an average chopstick, or it should be about the size of a bean sprout. We can all visualize those things. And that's all that, I don't want cooks to feel like you need to have a degree or extra special skills to figure out how to cook. You just need to choose a daikon that hasn't struggled. And so you want to peel the guy and then cut it. And when you're cutting, cut off a little piece like this so that it's laying flat so you've got some leverage. And then even when I get to this point and I'm feeling a little unstable, I'm going to turn it over. And I'm giving you all these tips because they're prep tips, because when you're in the kitchen, sometimes I see people, they'll be cutting like this and they'll just keep going, and I'm thinking in one of my cooking classes, that's a recipe for disaster, and I'm not really good with triage. I don't sew people up very well, and I don't do it myself very well. So you'll see me turning my vegetables like this. If you and I were to be cooking in my kitchen at home, you would see me doing this. Stack it up, curled knuckle approach so that you don't cut yourself. And the thing is that by making these small batches yourself at home, you're going to make a pickle that is really much more beautiful, frankly, than what you can buy out, because you've chosen your ingredients yourselves. And sometimes I'll cut a piece that's way too big. This is a gigantic chopstick. It doesn't matter, I'm just going to cut it up a little smaller. And once that I get that done, I'll add it to my bowl here. And even if you didn't have a scale, okay, the only recipe in the book where you really, really need to be super duper precise with the scale is if you're going to attack that bread recipe. And that's where I ask you to weigh everything out using metric if you have to. But otherwise, you can kind of eyeball this. Sure, I'm sorry. Sometimes when I do these things, there's an overhead mirror, and so, yeah, but we've got this GoPro, so there is an overhead shot. And perhaps it will soon be edited in the future, so you can see that. But for today, sure.
Can you talk a little bit about how you're finding the bread recipe and it's hard? And
sure.
It's a very different French bread than a normal.
Bill and I were talking about the bread. And so we went through great lengths to get you just the right bread today. But you don't have to struggle that much. There's been a lot of talk about the bread being some special Vietnamese secret, that there's rice flour in there, and you'll have seen perhaps recipes that have rice flour in there. I've tried about 6 of those recipes that have rice flour, and they don't work. The reason why they don't work is that if you have too much rice flour, the bread won't rise, right? We know from gluten-free diets that there's no gluten in rice, and we need the gluten from flour for the thing to puff up. So let me get back to that, because I'm going to talk about that once that we make the bread. Make the sandwiches. So after you get your vegetables chopped, and you can sort of visually see a 2-to-1 ratio of daikon to carrot, you're going to add a little sugar and a little salt. Here's the deal. Massage it. You're going to do this for a few minutes. And the reason why you're doing this is that you are drawing moisture out. With a sponge that's dry, that if you have a sponge that's dry, it's going to soak up liquid. So similarly, we're going to massage this for a few minutes to force it to release some water. And the reason why I'm using a combination of sugar and salt is that if it's all salt, then the pickle becomes too salty, right? Because the vegetables do end up absorbing a certain amount of the seasonings. And if you were doing a gigantic batch of this for a party or something, then just sprinkle the salt and sugar on and then walk away and let Mother Nature do its thing, okay? But I want to force this because I've got, let's say, just an hour before I've got my friends coming over, and I'm like in a real hurry to make this pickle, which brings me to the fact that the recipes in the book have time estimates as to how much you need to devote. And then oftentimes you'll see little notes in the recipes that tell you what else you can do with the recipes, little tweaks or how to source ingredients. That's where, like, at the end of the recipe, I can't fit anything else into the front of the recipe or in the instructions, so I create these notes. And that's just like part of the thing about cooking from recipes and cookbooks is that you have to learn how to read them. And we basically have like different methods of writing recipes, but they're standardized more or less. Okay, what am I looking for? I'm looking for my carrot to bend. And when this happens, when the vegetables bend like this, and I was talking to you while I did it, then there has been enough liquid, natural liquid in the vegetables that have been released to allow me to then move forward. There are like these banh mi recipes that'll just say, oh, just shave some carrots and then put it in some vinegar and then you're through. The thing with that is that you're just marinating. You're not really pickling. So now pretend that I'm at my sink, okay, and I just put a bunch of water into the bowl. This is called flushing with water. And then I'll strain it. And you can use a mesh strainer, you can use a colander for this. Press on the vegetables a little bit to get rid of some of the excess liquid. Put your vegetables into a jar if you'd like. We're just going to put it back into the bowl there. And then you've got your brine. So there's sugar. This is organic sugar. And if you ever cook with organic sugar, you'll find that it's a little bit different. I found that I have to weigh it compared to regular granulated sugar because it just seems like the grains are bigger. And so if I measure it, I end up just like with this unevenness between regular white sugar and like organic sugar. But if you like sweetness, don't worry about it. Then we've got like some vinegar. White vinegar, it is underrated. You don't need anything fancy, just, Heinz will do it, stuff that you can get in your, at the regular supermarket. And then you don't want to use it full strength. The vinegars in Vietnam are actually kind of like low acid. So that's why you'll see me blend vinegar plus water. And then you just stir this together until the sugar has dissolved. And then you pour it over your vegetables and let it sit there for about 45 minutes to an hour. If you've got time, do it way in advance and just, not worry about it. Bring it to work with your little pickle jar. Now, the only thing I have to tell you is that this stuff, because it's pickled and because it's daikon, it develops a certain funk. And the thing is that if you've like made kimchi or knows people who really love kimchi, you kind of like, I air it out. I'll like take it outside. My husband's like, I know we're having banh mi today because I can smell that pickle. So but I'm like, it smells good. But just remember that just because it smells weird doesn't mean that it's gone bad. And then the deal with when you're making these kinds of pickles, and I'll tell you, people in Vietnam and Asia who make pickles, we don't can them that much. We basically just make them and then we eat them. And then we refrigerate them or we keep them at room temperature, and that's it. So we've got 3 different kinds of pickles. So we've got the daikon and radish, and then this is a citrusy red cabbage and Meyer lemon peel. And then this one is a green tomato, so an unripe tomato variation on the lemongrass and snow pea pickle. So right now, if you're growing tomatoes at home and you have some really hard green ones, and I know in LA they'll ripen because it's getting really hot, but you can take some of the green ones and then you can turn it into this beautiful, beautiful pickle. And it's one of my favorite things to eat these days because it's really refreshing. And so you'll have access to all of these 3 pickles while you're over there at the Banh Mi bar. And use one or maybe mix them if you like. And there's also like grated carrot. So now that you've got your pickle ready, let's just move on to assembling the sandwich. So this is where sort of like the mystery of the banh mi comes into play, right? So the thing with the bread, every single time that I talk to someone about making Vietnamese sandwiches, one of the questions is, well, what are you going to do about that bread? And so the thing with the bread is that, so the French arrived in Vietnam and they brought their baguette culture with them. And the Vietnamese somehow figured out a way to bake these lofty baguettes in like tropical humidity. And sometimes they would add a touch of rice flour, turns out, to absorb humidity. And that resulted in kind of like this crunchy bread. The bread, by and large, my parents, who are like in their 80s, remember it being really chewy and with a nice crust on it. It's not as light as the bread that we find today. So when I was trying to figure out, like, should I do, a recipe in the book for the bread or not? And people were like, do it. And I thought, well, we don't really make bread in Vietnam because most people don't even have ovens in Asia. If they're lucky, they have a toaster oven, and they definitely have braziers, but no regular ovens. But people are like, I want to learn about that bread. So I kept asking and asking. A lot of Vietnamese people would tell me how to like make the bread, professional bakers. I would like try to go through, relatives and stuff. And it was like, oh, that's nice. No, thank you. We're not going to help you. So one day, I met a man who was actually the baker for Spice Table in downtown LA. And so the owners of Spice Table said, our baker will speak to you. I said, great. I was so excited. Met him down his place at like 6 o'clock. His ovens broke that day. So he couldn't show me how to do anything. So I said to him, what is it that you do to your bread? And he's like, sister, I basically have flour, sugar, yeast, salt, and water. And I said, do you put anything special into your flour to get that rise? And he said, no, sister, this is how I do. And then he showed me his technique of like, I call it the slap and roll. He takes the dough, he slaps it down, and then he rolls it up. It's a very Vietnamese technique, which you don't need to do. Because the dough that they use is very, very soft. But what I did notice when I was there at his bakery that day is that his flour is a commercial professional flour that contains dough conditioners. A lot of commercial flours contain this stuff. And in Europe, oftentimes flours have contained ascorbic acid, otherwise known as vitamin C. So I thought, okay, so he's using this special flour. And I made a mental note of what kind of flour it was, and I went and I looked it up I Googled it when I got home, right? And then that same trip down to LA, I live in Santa Cruz, I went to East Los Angeles, because I felt like the bolillo rolls that Latino markets have are very similar to the French rolls that are being used for banh mi. So I go down to Cesar Chavez, I walked into this little market that also had a panaderia, and I said, do you sell dough conditioners? I said, and I knew it was called mejorante para pan, because I had a friend who was sneaking some up from Mexico for me. And so I said, se vende mejorante para pan. I was like so proud of myself, and they're like, what? Go talk to the lady back there in the little office, and it's like this closet. You know, a lot of ethnic markets have like these little windows that you go talk to people in. So I asked her, and she said, no. And she said, let me have you talk to our baker. So I talked to the young man, and he drags out this 50-pound bag of flour, some manteca, and yeast. And then he said, that's all there is. So it's this dough conditioner, all right? And we don't have access to it as home cooks. But what I did was I formulated my own from a vitamin C tablet, and also, well, why not, right? And so I was buying capsules and like opening them up, or you can pound a little tablet in a mortar and pestle, and something called Vital Wheat Gluten. And Vital Wheat Gluten is basically the stuff that makes celiacs like really, really uncomfortable. And and I imagine that because a lot of the Vietnamese bakers of the bread were Chinese in origin in Vietnam, that they were using something like Vital Wheat Gluten, which is what a lot of the mock meats are made out of. If you're familiar with Asian-style mock meats, that really chewy stuff that they say, oh, this is mock duck or chicken, that's oftentimes this Vital Wheat Gluten stuff. And so I think they probably had a lot of that around. And what that does is it gives structure to the dough without making it chewy or rustic. So those two things in combination with a little bit of shortening and not too much salt, a little sugar allows that dough to rise really beautifully, and you can like make it at home and do it to your heart's delight. Now the thing is that you'll notice that a lot of the bread used for making banh mi is not heavily salted. And the reason for that is that if you've got salt in your bread, it retards rising, but you need a little bit of it for flavor. So if you were to bake bread without any salt, you get these loaves that look like porpoises, okay? But the thing is that you need a little salt for flavor. So as a result, I found that a lot of the Vietnamese sandwiches benefit from a hit of umami saltiness. So let me walk you through how to make a little banh mi so that you can get to it over there. So we've got these little rolls that have been heated. And the first thing you want to do is just take some from the top. You want to make a little trough for yourself. Why? Because you're going to put all this stuff into it, and you need this thing to somehow close, right? Otherwise, it's going to go squirting out one side, and then like that's not going to be very socially acceptable. The other thing is that then you want some fat. Now, traditionally, it was butter, which was very expensive in Vietnam. But gosh, if you make mayonnaise, and if you've ever made mayonnaise before, it's egg, a little acid, and some oil. We had that in Vietnam. We could come up with those ingredients. So that's the beauty of having the freshly made mayonnaise. And this is a little sriracha aioli that I made for you guys today. And Chef Bill has a bunch of other cool stuff that I'll ask him to talk about. Different kinds of mayonnaises that you guys have here at the cafeteria. And I want you to notice that I am spreading my mayo practically to the rim. Okay? And then I'm going to add that little bit of umami. So, in Vietnam, this is another contribution of the French. They brought with them certain condiments, and this stuff is called Maggi seasoning. The Vietnamese call it Maggi because it sounds really, we just go Maggi, it sounds so exciting and romantic, right? So this stuff was invented by a Swiss miller in the 1800s. And it was because a lot of women were going to work in the Industrial Revolution. They didn't have time to make like soups and stuff that they would ordinarily do. And so he created this stuff. It's umami, umami, umami. Sometimes you'll see MSG in it. The French and other Europeans took it all over the world. It's very popular in China, in Latin America, which is why you'll see this is a version made in Europe. This is a version made in China. This is a version made and sold for Latino markets. It's called Jugo Sazonador. I bought this on Alvarado and Sunset, okay? This is a Thai knockoff called Golden Mountain. So if you guys taste all of this, like the flavor profile is more or less the same. If you can't find this stuff, and this is sold at a lot of like Vietnamese and Chinese markets, same thing as this, but this is also available in small size at regular supermarkets. You just have to shop for it, say like where the soups and bouillon cubes are. And Thai markets here, and this is at Latino markets. If you can't get any of that, you can use Bragg liquid aminos. But I do something a little funny with that stuff because this isn't as salty or as sweet as I like it, so I doctor it up. So this is maji. And what I do is I just cook some of this up with sugar. It's in the book. And very similar things. This is soy-based, and you can buy it at like health food stores and at regular markets. This is now being like shelved at in the Asian food aisle, okay? So I'm just gonna use my European friend here. And the shape of this really is like the original shape from the 1880s. It's still pretty much the same. So that's why it's like this funny looking thing. So now this is like the artistry part. I'm going to sprinkle some on. You do sort of like a Jackson Pollock kind of thing. And then you add your meat. There isn't a lot of meat in banh mi. It's basically like a 2-to-1 visual ratio of meat to vegetables. And then we'll add some pickle. And then a little chili. Leave those seeds in there, you guys. And if you're like super heat seekers, use the part that's closest to the stem. And if you're not, well, sometimes when you're using this sriracha aioli, you don't really need as much chili. And then with your cucumber, you can cut them as rounds or as slices, like thin pieces like this, like we have here today. And the layering of things. I found that it's really great to layer things the way I'm doing it right now because there's something quite magical that happens when the cucumber and the cilantro hits the mayonnaise. And then you just close it up and you're ready to eat. Okay? So that's what you're going to do over there. Now, Bill, what kind of proteins do you have? Can you go over our options?
Yep. So today we have some flank steak. If you would like steak banh mi, ask you to direct you to this area over here. Over here we have tofu, and we have some grilled vegetables. We also have some spam and some chicken.
Spam.
Spreads. Right, we have Andrea's sriracha aioli. We also have a basil aioli. If anybody is allergic to sesame seeds, stay away from the black spread. But this is seaweed, sesame, and carrot. And then just a variety of fresh herbs, some spicy chilies. There's a little fish sauce and sriracha over here. So.
Oh, but sriracha, one last thing is, I have a bottle of the original sriracha sauce, and I love, you guys should try it because you may not ever have access, it's going to be distributed soon in the US, I think, very widely. But this is like based on the recipe from like 1949 that this woman came up with in Thailand. And I know, so give it a taste, we'll put it out and you can like use a fork or even like a cucumber strip will work. Just dip it in and give it a taste and compare it to what we know here in the United States as the rooster sauce. Because this is what you brought me here for, right? So that you can like try all these different things. And for the reason, you don't have to have cilantro in your sandwich. You can use different kinds of herbs, mint, basil, whatever that you like, because some people really, really hate cilantro or can't tolerate it. So go for it. And I have these little stickers that say, "In Banh Mi, we trust." And so they're based upon the graphics in the book, and I use them they were supposed to be temporary tattoos, but I found that it's better as like a little thing for my jars. So they're up here for you to take one. And if you have any other questions, I'm here to answer them. And if you'd like for me to sign your books, I can certainly do that too. Thank you.